Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. It's day two, part two of B&H Wildlife Week. We really kicked things off in a great way today. But next up, we have Charly Savely, who's going to talk to us about all about wildlife photography, specifically using the A1. And we'll, of course, touch upon all those previous Sony cameras that you've had use with. Some ground rules for everybody watching on YouTube, or if you're here on Zoom with us. We love your questions. Please bring them on. We have the B&H moderators feeding me all the questions as they come in. I will do my best to ask those questions as they come in, if they're relevant to specific imagery. And if not, I will save some of the good, juicy questions for the end. So hello, Charly. Welcome. Where are you coming from today?
Hey, I am coming from Anchorage, Alaska. How's it going?
It's good. It's springtime here. Has it hit you guys yet?
We are in breakup mud season, as we call it. All the snow just melted. There's still a bit on the mountains, but it is just mud everywhere.
Well, hopefully that doesn't last too long. But I feel like where you are up north, you kind of get caught in the seasons for a little bit longer than the rest of us.
Yeah, we just finished up 7 month winter, 7 months of snow. I just heard in your last talk that you never got to see the Northern Lights. So I was like, well, you need to come to Alaska next time.
Yep. I know. I could definitely increase my odds of seeing them by a trip up to Anchorage for sure. But maybe I'm cursed. Maybe it just hasn't been meant to be yet. 3 trips to the Canadian Rockies, all right around winter, and yeah, no luck yet. So
Oh, you got to
maybe there
come
might be
here.
luck time.
Yeah, I went out once this year to look for them and I saw them one of the most intense shows and I was like, yes.
I'm sure that's an amazing moment. If you're in the chat and you've seen the Northern Lights, let us know where you were. Let's all come up with some bucket list destinations. If we're not traveling right now, let's open the journal, write down all those bucket list places. I know I have a page all about the Northern Lights and where I can potentially see them. So, well, great. We're going to have tons of questions for you today, Charly. I think that I'll let you start with a quick intro to yourself, how you got started with photography, and then I want to play the Wild Alaska short video for everyone to see. So give us a quick introduction.
So, hey everyone, I'm Charly Savely. I was born and raised in Bristol, UK. I've moved around the world my whole life, landed in the US. Um, and I have my degree in fine art and photography, although I don't think you need that to be successful. Um, I mainly started out in landscape and portraits and then evolved into wildlife, and that is my passion, and conservation is what I care about. And I guess I am a Sony ambassador, so that's how I'm here today.
Great, very good. So I'm going to jump right into a film called Wild Alaska. Charly, anything you want to say to lead into the film?
Yeah, we shot this during December this year. It was an incredible experience. It was negative 50 degrees at one point, so it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done. But it was an incredible experience to be learning how to dog sled in the Arctic, basically.
Awesome. Okay, that's a nice little tease. Everybody enjoy. If there are streaming issues, this video is available from Sony Alpha Universe on YouTube. It's also all over Instagram. It is called Wild Alaska. And without further ado, I'm going to pull up this short film, only about 2 or 3 minutes, and I know you guys are going to enjoy it. So here we go.
To me, Alaska is where the wild is. People prefer tropical vacations, the beautiful beaches, and so I've kind of rebelled against that, and I like chasing the colder, harsher climates. The biggest two characteristics you need to have for wildlife photography are patience and respect. You need to have the patience to be able to spend days sitting in a pile of snow, freezing while you observe an animal. You also need to have the respect that you are in its environment, you are in its home, you are a visitor. My hope with my work is to bring awareness to certain species of animals and also climate change.
Every year I go out to the glaciers and I see them receding more and more, but still a lot of the world is resistant to this idea that when the glaciers are gone, so are we. As long as I am able to see, I don't think I'll ever stop taking photos. I'm humbled to live here in Alaska, to be surrounded in its beauty, and I hope that when people see my work, that they're inspired to keep the wild places wild.
Okay, let me back out from the video here. An amazing little film, Charly, and what an honor that you got to be part of that. Tell us a little bit about how that started. That obviously was all filmed on the A1. You were holding the A1, probably your first chance to get your hands on it. When did all that start coming together?
It happened really fast. It was very kind of last minute, like, hey, you love wildlife photography. We're launching this amazing camera. Are you free next week to go on this intense trip and just shoot with the camera for the first time? And it was just like, yes, okay, yes, drop everything, let's go. And it was, yeah, it was so magical and such an honor to be a part of.
What was it like that first chance getting to shoot with the A1?
It was it was like love at first sight. Oh man, I think the first test we did was at the glacier. Obviously, that's not wildlife, so that was just like wow, like the resolution and everything there, and the low light was great. And then I think the next day was filming muskox and bison, and um, just instantly how the camera was tracking, how it was so fast. I was like a kid in a candy shop just freaking out.
So I know you've been through a bunch of Sony mirrorless cameras. What is the biggest difference? How long did you have with the R3? What was it like with the R4? And then coming up to the A1?
Yeah, I love I started with the 7.3, and that is great. I recommend that camera to anyone that's switching to Sony, anyone that's more just getting into photography. That camera is the most perfect camera for the price point. And then I did the R3 and then the R4, because for me, similar to what David was saying in the last discussion, printing my work is huge. Um, when you're as a wildlife photographer, a lot of your income is just from your prints. So having that resolution is so important. In my editing, I also crop in a lot, and I like to get real close, and the resolution is great for that. And then evolved to the A1, which is really just the best of every camera plus more. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about it. It now has a bird eye focus, which I haven't gotten to test out yet, but I'm so excited to go birding and test that out soon. So yeah, it's great.
Interesting. So you had that pre-production, so the bird eye AF wasn't there yet. That's too bad, but I really can't wait to see your results. That said, your images have been tack sharp with the animals IAF. I think as I go into some images, I think the audience will definitely see where that resolution comes into play, and especially with the eyes. So let me jump into some image shares, and then I'm gonna quickly just kind of unroll with some more questions. So let me ask a question, then I'll do the share. Let's talk a little bit about your locations. Where you fell in love with wildlife photography. Where have you been in the world, and kind of how you've evolved as a photographer, where you now are at home in Alaska.
For me, it's just all been a very instinctual and kind of just progression over years. There wasn't one moment where I was like, oh, I'm going to get into wildlife photography. It's more of I just kept going on hikes while I was doing more landscape stuff, and wildlife would pop up, and I would slowly notice, oh, I actually really enjoyed photographing that animal. It was similar to like taking a portrait of a human, except for you have zero control. You have to give all that up. You can't tell the animal what to do, obviously. You can't tell it how to pose. You have to be extremely patient and, just quiet and respectful. And I kind of fell in love with that, I think, because I'm not a patient person. I'm definitely like to control things. And so I have to give all of that up with wildlife photography. And I really love that.
Where else have you been in the world? I know you have some images on Instagram from South Africa. Tell us a bit about that experience. How long ago was that too?
Yeah, that was 2 years ago. Yeah, last October. And that was a life-changing experience for me. I got to work with a nonprofit that I really admire and look up to. And I got to join them with rescuing 2 tigers that had been abused and all of that stuff in Germany. And we got to transfer and rehabilitate the tigers to this amazing sanctuary in South Africa. So that was my first time going to South Africa, and it changed my life. Yep, there she is. And yeah, getting to hear all the stories of these animals changed my life. I love it because it really got me into, I really like photographing animals in sanctuaries, which is a bit of controversial topic. I notice a lot of like new kids getting into wildlife photography, they go to the zoo and, or they go to the zoo and they pretend that it's a wild animal. I think that's such a missed opportunity. So I love supporting ethical sanctuaries that are doing it right, not zoos. And I love telling the story of what that animal has been through, how they were abused, how they were rescued, all of that. So I think, yeah, that can be a really important aspect of, wildlife photography, even though it's not wild, is sharing how these animals were saved. And I think it further aids in conservation work.
So what brought you to Alaska? You and I know each other really well, and we've always have talked, and I've heard about that search for home. Talk to us a little bit about that and what led you to Alaska.
It's a lot of things. Kind of the minute we crossed the border from Canada to here, we just felt like it was home out of all the places that we visited. People here, the culture here is not like the lower 48. Alaskans are tough. Alaskans are real. They can handle a lot of harsh environments, and people are very genuine here too, which I really love. So that made us feel like home. But then also, as you know, I'm a big fan of the cold. I don't do well in hot places. And I love photographing glaciers and climate change and showing how all that's changing. And this is really the best place for me. Alaska is the closest thing I could find to Norway and Iceland in the US. And yeah, it's a wild place.
You know, it may not be a question about wildlife photography, but you know, you've been all around the Arctic. Elaborate a little bit more on the impact that you're seeing and maybe how it does relate to the wildlife that you've seen up there.
Yeah, I mean, in places I've been to, like Iceland and Svalbard, you see climate change in Svalbard, especially dramatically, because they're the most northwest, or sorry, the most north town in the world. And you can just see how summers are getting warmer and sea ice is melting, especially here in Alaska. I think all of our sea ice now is gone in the summer. Like it's really sad. And polar bears are kind of trying to learn to adapt or die at coming in to land on the summer. And they're coming into villages and stuff like they didn't really used to do, and looking for food because they're hungry. So you definitely feel the effects. And even here, just in town where I am in Anchorage, there's a lot of popular glaciers where I've seen a photo of it from 20 years ago and it's 10 times the size of what it is now. Some little glaciers, it's not even worth visiting them anymore because they're almost gone and they used to be massive. Sometimes they have like the little pole in the ground with a sign that says this is where the glacier used to be, and then you see how small it's gotten. And it's crazy to me that if anyone could live up in the north and deny climate change, because it's so clearly obvious here. You're seeing it yearly get smaller and smaller. And yes, in some moments glaciers expand, but then they always recede. And when you see the recede, it's just like, wow.
I think a lot of people on social media, and at the rate that information spreads, it still might be new for people with global warming. And I think everyone could relate to know that our environment changes. With the seasons it changes, but with revisiting places and studying places, hearing from someone like you that you've seen it happen in front of your eyes is a lot. It's really important, and I really want to commend you for doing that work and bringing that information to everyone, and using your voice. It's going a long way. We see the engagement that you have on social media and your fans and followers and friends. It's part of your voice, and it's been really awesome to see over the course of these years that we've known each other. And I'm excited to see how you progress with that voice and bring more information to people. So I know you do a lot of workshops, and we're in this crazy world right now, and I want to know what's on the forecast for the future. I'm not sure if you made it to Antarctica or if that trip is still in the works, but let's share with the audience what you do on your trips, how you are as an instructor as well as somebody with knowledge and information.
Yeah, so similar to what David said in the last talk, obviously last year during the pandemic, I had to cancel all my workshops, and that was really, a rough and scary time. But they are all back on. I'm in the process of launching an Alaskan workshop, maybe a few different ones because there's just so much to do here. And then my Antarctica trip got moved to next January, and it ended up selling out. I think everyone's just really dying to travel now. It sold out so much that we might launch a second Antarctica trip. And then I am about to release a workshop in South Africa, which I am beyond excited about. We're going to be doing a lot of like nonprofit conservation work while also teaching photography. We're going to be getting into some special situations where we're going to get to collar animals, wild dogs and maybe some rhinos and things like that. So that's going to be an incredible learning opportunity. But yeah, I love teaching. Since I couldn't teach in person this year, I launched an online workshop for wildlife photography, which was great. I think, since I did get my degree in photography, I know how that process works, but I will say I feel like you learn so much more than you would in school by attending a workshop. The ones I've attended have changed my life, and even the ones I teach changed my life. It's such an experience to meet a group of people that we don't know each other, but we're kind of all into the same thing. And then we go through this really intense, beautiful trip, and then we learn so much, and it just forms this bond. I still talk to a bunch of my students from my previous workshops, and now I consider them friends. So yeah, I highly recommend photography workshops if you guys haven't attended one before.
We're all stuck at home. Some of us are still getting around. Domestic travel is really been a focus, I think, for people, because it's a little more realistic. But my take on the future is that, we're really going to premeditate these trips and these opportunities. And while we've been home and watching and coming up with all this inspiration, people are going to want to invest in that out of this world experience. I still think workshops will trend, as they're more accessible, just around the national parks, of course, here in the States. But a trip like Africa or a trip like Antarctica sounds like an opportunity somebody's going to want to invest in. So I'm really hopeful for the future. I'm really excited for you to go. 2021, around the corner, right? Fingers crossed. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the screen share with A1 Images. And if you could walk us through a little bit about the experience and maybe talk about the animals that you were shooting. And we'll start with this one.
Yeah, so these images were all on the same trip from the video that we just watched. This caribou is amazing. I just fell in love with it. There was a whole herd, but this one was the one I was obsessed with because it only had one antler. And usually, seasonally, caribou, moose, they shed their antlers and they fall off for a period of time. And usually there's like a stub or something where you could see like it had fallen off. But this one, it appears that it literally is only growing one antler. It didn't have a place where you could see that the other one fell off. So I was super excited about this. I love finding weird, unique things in nature that stand out and make something not, normal.
I never noticed that. I've seen your imagery here, and I always just assumed that was a full antler. So interesting. I think I heard you or read you said something on social media about being a portrait photographer for animals. Walk us through that a little bit. You really extract such personality out of some animals. Where's your train of thought there?
Yeah, I think just in the way I developed where I was doing human portraits and then it evolved to wildlife, I noticed that it kind of just carried through. Trying to find uniqueness or invoke emotion, bring out something about the animal that draws the viewer in is very portrait-like. I'm always, a lot of wildlife photography can be very wide angle, and that's great. And sometimes I do love getting the wide angle shots, but I also just love getting the up and close and personal and like trying to peer into that animal's soul a little bit, which I feel like is more portrait. So I was just like, maybe I'm just a portrait photographer of wildlife. I don't know.
I love it. I think that there's a whole rebranding in your future about being a portrait photographer for the animals. They didn't know they needed it until they found you. But it makes sense. And I think the audience can relate that, these images are breathing and extracting emotion. When you make eye contact through that image, you're really just drawn in and sucked in, especially to the eyes. Your work on the sharpness around the eyes just is really incredible.
That's that A1 eye focus.
Tell us about this shot here.
Yeah, so that was my favorite dog on my little sled team. She was super timid. She hates men. And then she loves women. And then when she warms up, she's like a total cuddly love bug. And I loved her eyes, her two different colored eyes. I loved her little freckles on her nose. And she did not want her portrait taken. And so I just kind of loved on her the whole week, and finally got that little shot of her. And yeah, she melts my heart.
I think all of us are melting a little bit. Okay, we have a question from Leo who says, how far are you usually from the animals? So, this was part of your dog pack, but, looking at your other images, tell us about the lenses that you're using and, how far away you are.
Yeah, I think that, the ability to crop in with high resolution can be so deceiving. Sometimes I get comments of like, whoa, you were like way too close. Actually, I wasn't. I was on like the 400 pretty far away, and I was able to crop in half the image. So, that's a lot of my editing. But yeah, definitely keeping the ethical distance is something I always follow. I pretty much don't want the animal to notice me. I'm always the appropriate distance away, which I think Nat Geo standards, I forget what they are. It's different for certain animals. Like, I think it's like bears, you should be like 100 yards away or something. It's, and you kind of just do it so much that you kind of know what's the appropriate distance, and you learn how to like read the animal, and just learn how to not distract them or upset them in any way and blend in with their environment. So yeah, I'm always usually pretty far away. Obviously, in the case with like the husky, I was pretty close because it was a husky. I could be close. She's all cuddly, so I could get right in there. But yeah, bison, I was far away. Although, as you saw in the video, there was one moment where I was pretty scared, actually, where the bison just started running, and it was great. And I was like, yeah, I'm filming them. But then they ran and formed a circle around me. And I was like kind of looking at our guides like, am I okay? Like, is this going to be okay? And I just like stayed calm, just continued to photograph them. And they didn't seem to mind. They just kind of were checking me out, seeing what my deal was. And then they moved on, which was, my heart was pounding, but it was awesome. And then the fox below, we have a local fox here that lives in the neighborhood. And it's interesting. The fox is really curious. Where the fox lives is like a high trafficked park. So there's just people walking by all day with their dogs. And the fox likes to come out and greet people's dogs, which is kind of cool. So I'll just post up, on a path and just watch this fox come up and be curious about people's dogs, and then it will run away, and it's a great time.
Terrific. Okay, I got another question. An interesting one. So Naveen is asking, do you find landscapes to be more or less challenging than photographing wildlife?
I definitely think wildlife for me is way more challenging. Again, because there's no control there. You never know what the animal's going to do. Your settings have to be dialed in before, because you never know if that animal's going to just spring into action or be super still. Wildlife or, landscape is more of a challenge in dealing with the conditions, depending on where you are and lighting. But with wildlife, you're also dealing with that. So yeah, for me, I think wildlife is definitely more of a challenge, and that's why I enjoy it.
Let's elaborate a little more about, planning trips, where are you finding information? What are the rules? Where do you find them? What goes into, premeditating a trip and actually hitting the road for it? And, what kind of planning are you doing?
Yeah, my planning either goes one of two ways. Either I know there's wildlife in that area, so I'm planning that trip to hopefully see that wildlife, or I'm just planning a trip to go on a trip just to see something, plan a trip to Denali just to see the mountain, and then wildlife pops up along the way. If it's a trip where I know, for example, there's going to be like brown bears, then I'm going to research the crap out of brown bears, their habits, everything. I also, like with predators like that, always recommend to hire a guide. Sorry, my dog is just barking. I always recommend to hire a guide because obviously they're going to be way more of an expert than you are. And, by hiring them, you're also helping with, ecotourism and all that. So, yeah, that is going to be something I heavily research. Obviously, if you're, you know, close to grizzly bears, you're going to want to make sure that you are respectful and not going to do anything to upset them. And yeah, it really depends on the animal. And when you photograph them more, like the fox, for example, you become more interested. You're like, oh, I really want to learn more about red foxes and like their environment, and are they threatened, and can I help? What are their habits? What are their personalities? All of that stuff. And especially like moose out here, the moose, you start being able to recognize the individual moose, and they, they get nicknames, and then you see they have different personalities and all of that. So I love all of that.
What I'm hearing is the passion develops from the experience, and then you go down that rabbit hole with more research and more education. That's how I am, at least too, especially with landscapes and these wild places. So here's an interesting question. Where could I learn to edit my wildlife photos? So maybe you could describe a little bit about your editing process, the softwares that you use, and in relation to wildlife photography.
Yeah, this is something that I've been wrestling with and thinking about a lot, actually. Just because, there's kind of two routes that you can go with wildlife photography. You can go with the very traditional wildlife photography, which is essentially more of photojournalism. It's the Nat Geo style, where you are following the rules of Nat Geo. You are editing like Nat Geo, which with Nat Geo edits, it's extremely minimal. You can't change anything. You can't add anything. Can't remove anything. So there's that path you can go down. Obviously, I didn't choose to go down that path, which I think has its pros and cons. It has its cons because Nat Geo will probably never work with me based on the way my work looks, but then it opens up other opportunities, and I've been okay with that. I just can't leave a photo untouched, like, or minimal editing. I have to edit it in the way that is pleasing to my eye and makes me feel an emotion. So I would say if you're going down that realm, which I guess we could call more artistic wildlife photography, versus documentary, it's about following your intuition. What about the animal sticking out to you? How can you accentuate that in the photo? How can you add dramatic lighting to this animal portrait? How can you make colors pop? All those kinds of things it's very intuitive. And also focusing on finding your own style. What are the colors you like? What's the kind of lighting? Do you like bright? Do you like really moody and dark? Like, what are these things? Ask yourself these questions and then start applying that to all your work.
What else can you tell us about, finding and discovering your own style? How long did it take you? Do you think that you found it yet? Talk to us about that journey.
Yeah. It was something I started focusing on when I went through a season where I felt really lost in my photography. And I was looking at my peers around me, and I noticed that some people just naturally have it from like day one. They open up Lightroom and Photoshop and they have their style, and it's so frustrating, but like good for them. For me, it took me years to find my style through all the experimenting that I just mentioned a second ago. I do feel like I've found it, but it's also constantly evolving. Like, even you just scrolling back a few months on my feed, I'm like, oh, I hate all those edits from like a month ago. So it is constantly evolving, but I feel like at least I've found it now and it's there. And I get excited to see how it's going to change over the years. But in just editing, the editing can help amplify your voice, because you can make the photo more emotional, the lighting more emotional, the colors, you can make it pop out so your work stands out. But yeah, and that can kind of amplify the story you're telling, I think. But I don't know, I'm always thinking about this and wrestling with all these ideas.
For you listeners, I think we should all take that to heart. If we feel stuck, there might not even be an endpoint of saying, I have my style. It is a constant evolution. The editing process will change. Your camera gear will change. The way you tell stories should change. So embrace that change is what I always say for people who may feel like they're stuck or struggling or have that writer's block or editing block. We've all been there. Okay, Alex has a great question. What's been your favorite animal to photograph?
Oh, that's hard. I probably those bear cubs. That was amazing. I think if you go up to the top, there's two of them playing. That was just such a joyous moment. It's interesting because it's so playful and so cute, but you have to remember that they're also like wild animals. The guide that I was with, she was like, oh my gosh, like this is so great. I'm so glad you're getting to see this experience, because last week I was taking a photographer out and a male just came up and just ate one of the cubs, so it's like, it's so brutal. And obviously everyone on that little trip was pretty bummed, but it's the reality of nature is just constant, where you get these innocent, beautiful moments like that. But then the next moment it can be totally brutal, like the hawk right there eating a dead rabbit. Yeah, I love how yin and yang nature is. It's so happy and joyous one moment, and then it's like brutal and death like the next moment. It's such a reality to how life is.
Where were those cubs photographed?
They were in Katmai, Alaska, which is kind of under threat. They've been wanting to mine it. It's a battle that's been going on for a long time now, but they're wanting to mine it for its resources. And, conservationists, people that live here, are very against it. And it's just this ongoing battle. If they mine it, it will potentially ruin the water, which will ruin the salmon, which will kill the bears. So it's a big deal here in Alaska.
What's that journey like, getting to Katmai, and how accessible is it?
It's not very accessible. If you want to go, you have to be prepared to spend a lot of money. You're probably going to be hiring or hopping on a bush plane. I think you can, maybe you can take a commercial flight. I'm not sure. I can't remember, because there's different areas. This area was extremely remote. You have to take a bush plane there, and you'll want a guide who has protection in this area. There's more popular touristy areas that I think you can just fly to and like stay at a lodge or something. But this was very wild and remote. But yeah, if you want to go, you can make it happen. It's just a big commitment.
What is it like being on a small plane? I think a lot of the viewers, may not be familiar with, chartering a flight for a very unique experience like this. Is that just as much of a photographic opportunity as well?
Yeah, it's definitely epic. It's also terrifying. I'm not like, I don't fly very well. And bush planes obviously are heavily dependent on the weather. And we, on that day we had a good weather day, but then all of a sudden the wind picked up and we had like one moment where the plane just like dropped out of the sky, and oh my gosh, I was nauseous. I was, but our pilots and everyone that has been on bush planes regularly, they're just like, oh yeah, that's just a normal day, and it's just like, oh my gosh. So yeah, that in itself is an adventure. And then seeing the views, like this was taken from the window of the bush plane, a little bear walking out to the sea, seeing those views from above are incredible.
You know, the journey is the adventure, as they say.
Yeah.
Okay, so a similar question. You talked about your favorite animal to photograph, those cubs. What a fun opportunity. Here's one more look here too. But what would you photograph next? You know, what animal haven't you seen or have you been looking for? Or, you know, where's your bucket list for wildlife?
Yeah, my bucket list is definitely polar bears. I've seen one once, but it was extremely far away. I could barely see it with like the naked eye. I was shooting at 800. I think it was 800. Oh no, actually maybe it was more than 800. No, I think it was like 1200 maybe. So I could barely see it with my naked eye. Plus I'm like kind of blind anyway. And even then I had to like crop in my photos a ton for you to really be able to see it. So my goal is to get to polar bears because it goes hand in hand with what I care about with climate change, you know, with glaciers to sea ice and what's happening to the polar bears. So that is my number one goal.
Okay, good luck. Can't wait to see the emotion you bring out of some polar bear images. Okay, another question. We'll get a little more technical. Lots of questions about the A1. So Dustin was asking, he just got his hands on the A1. He upgraded from the A9 II. He's always shot manual since he started. His question for you is, do you shoot any other priority or you prefer to be in manual?
Yeah, I'm always in manual. Sometimes, you know, doing shutter priority could be good for like if you're on a heli flight and the light is changing constantly, but you want to keep that really fast shutter speed, maybe something like that I would dabble in. But for the most part, I think because I'm a control freak, I like to just be in manual all the time. And if I miss a shot, if I mess it up, it's my fault, you know? So you can only blame yourself. But yeah, the control of manual is what I like.
Agreed. I'm on the same boat. Certain situations, you know, you drop into aperture or shutter priority. Okay, another question. Fabio says, greetings from the Amazon. So that's fun.
Oh, wow.
Very impressed by the A1 specs, but has some doubts about the long-term investment on the investment side of E-mount. So any thoughts on that? You know, your experience with the previous A7R generations, the A7 III. What's your take on the price point and, you know, who's the A1 for?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the A1 is expensive. It is an investment. For me, it makes sense because it's been a long-term progression, you know, of starting with the 7 III to the R3 to the R4 to the A1. But for me, it's an investment that's worth it because the A1 is kind of the pinnacle of what Sony's done so far. I definitely would say it's a dream camera for wildlife and sports photographers, anything with, you know, fast motion, anything, you know, emotion, it's amazing for. That being said, if you're a beginner photographer, you're just starting out, you know, I don't think it would be worth it for you to invest in this camera realistically because it is expensive and there are, you know, a lot of great cameras in the Sony family that would be better for people that are just starting out or, you know, people that don't want to make it a full-time career. But that being said, if you're into wildlife, it's probably the dream camera for a wildlife photographer. And I don't know how they'll top it in the future, but yeah.
Okay, we got a question from Joseph. Have you ever been caught in any life-threatening situations with nature and wildlife? Any good stories? You know, you're here with us today. We're happy, you know, nothing too life-threatening, but share with us.
Yeah, I guess two kind of stories pop to mind. I think that image is down below a little bit. It was literally my last hour of shooting in Katmai, and it was raining. There was a storm coming in, and so we had to go. So it's that one right there, big bear shot at the bottom. Yeah, we were like, okay, the storm's coming in, like, let's get out of here. We need to hike back to the bush plane. And we're just following the river system. And we're just, walking back along the river. And there was like this big bush. And we're just not even, just concentrating on getting back. And all of a sudden, this bear just popped up around the bush. It was probably 3 feet from me. I could probably and all of us just like froze in our tracks, and we're like, oh. And our guide was just like, everyone just be calm. Like, she was like describing to us what the bear was, how it was acting, its kind of vibe. And she's like, okay, this bear is either going to decide to walk past us, and if it does, just like stay calm, let it go by, or it's going to decide to turn around and not deal with us. And so we just all sat there just watching it, which it was so intense. My heart was just like racing. And it just stared at us for a long time, and then it just decided to turn back around. So that's definitely, the kind of situation where I was like, wow, I'm super thankful we had a guide there. She had protection. You always want to be safe. She knows the animal better than I do. Yeah. And that was definitely like a life moment. And then another moment was, just when I was starting out, I didn't know anything, and I learned the hard way. I was in Montana in Glacier National Park, and I was photographing a bighorn sheep. And I don't know, got too close or triggered it in some way. And it definitely like charged me, and I flew backwards through my camera, and looking back, I was like, oh my God, that was so stupid. That was kind of an intro to wildlife, beginner, being an idiot. But you learn your lesson, and I learned it then. I have a lot of friends here that have been full on chased by moose, had to climb up a tree, all of that stuff. So I never want to get into anything like that. So I'm kind of a grandma now about safety and respect, and I never want to be too close. You can always, you got to get this gut feeling when it happens, of like, oh, I took one step too close, bad idea, and you get this like drop in your stomach kind of thing. And I just don't ever want to deal with that ever again.
Right. We learn from our mistakes.
Yeah.
And this comes back to what you talked about earlier, researching animal behavior and really knowing the rules. Because these cameras and these lenses make you look like you're right in front of these animals. And it might not set an example for the average person who's not doing research and just thinks they can walk right up to the bison in Yellowstone. And there's 100 other scenarios. So, we learn from our mistakes, we set better examples, and having a guide, what a story. I think everyone listening's heart was racing, talking about that bear popping up from the bush. Okay. Here's a question. Jenna says, your stills are incredible. We all know that. We've seen that comment come in a bunch. Do you ever take video of yourself? And there's another similar question about using Sony cameras for video. So touch upon that.
Yeah, video has been something I've been getting into, during this downtime in the pandemic. It was something that I was kind of always on my mind, but I just never got around to it because I'm just very consumed with stills. But yeah, during this time, I've been, slowly teaching myself Premiere, which is a beast. And getting into video, I hope to start doing a lot more of it. It's just so hard for me when I'm in the field to be focusing on both. So I think that's when it comes in handy to eventually, build up a team of people that you trust, that if you have an assistant or a partner that can help you tag team video at the same time. Sorry, my dog is barking. Can you hear her?
Yeah, but no problem.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think it's the mailman's coming, so she's going crazy. But yeah, having a team to help is obviously like the end goal. But Yeah, sometimes it's too hard for me to multitask. So sometimes I have to decide, okay, today I'm going out and I'm only focusing on video. And then sometimes today I'm going out, I'm only focusing on stills. Sometimes I can try to switch back and forth, but I find that it really starts like stressing me out, and I'm not getting as good of result because I'm just trying to do two things at once, literally. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think we could all relate. It's very hard. Our cameras are capable of doing this video now. So it's definitely something we all strive to do. But we have this workflow for photography. It's very zen. It's very a moment that, you're doing your thing. You're taking your landscapes. You're, stalking an animal for the right shot. So it's so hard to think both minds. We really need to split our minds. And some people think getting that second camera, whether it's to do time lapse, which is a video variant, or to do video, it's just so hard to be in two places at the same time, especially when I think it's more valuable to be there to experience something and really enjoy it versus now worrying about video or, oh, I got my shot. Now I have to think about video. You have to get into a whole new set of shoes and figure that out. I just say step back and maybe it's time to just enjoy the moment and enjoy the trip and what you're shooting. So yeah, I think everyone could relate. Thanks for touching on that. Okay, a couple of last questions. This has been such a great conversation. Any last thoughts about the A1 and really who it's for again, and what you absolutely love about it?
Yeah, kind of just what I mentioned before. I think it's the ultimate wildlife photography camera, and great for sports too. If you're serious about photography, definitely invest in it. It's great. I've shot the Northern Lights with it now. I loved that. It handled the low light noise. I mean, there pretty much was no noise. It was amazing. That was great. So I've ticked off the low light box there. Shot wildlife in low lights, and it was great. So yeah, I just can't say enough. The lack of noise has been amazing. The tracking of the animals is incredible. So yeah.
That's great. Can't wait to see more images. Loving these Northern Lights.
Yes, I finally just got my A1 from you guys in the mail, so I'm excited to start using it.
Traveled a long way from New York to get to you in Alaska.
Yep.
An adventure that camera's already had, so
yeah.
to do with it. Okay, my last question for you, Charly, and thanks again for doing this and really sharing all your experiences and all. Sell us on Alaska. Tell us, what is the difference between the lower 48 and coming to Alaska and having that adventure?
Yeah, Alaska is the last frontier. We compared to down south, we only have 3 main roads here, and only 20% of Alaska is roaded. So majority of Alaska is wild, untouched. You can see it, but you need to see it via bush plane or boat. And we are as big as, I believe it's California, Texas, and Montana combined. I think it's those 3 states. So it's absolutely huge, endless exploring. I could spend my entire life exploring Alaska and see none of it, see half of it, not even half of it. So yeah, if you want a place that is truly wild with awesome characters, the people here you come across some Alaskans that are literally movie characters that are real life. And we have over 100,000 glaciers here. It's amazing.
Love it. I'm sold. I can't wait. It's an adventure we all have on our bucket list. So thank you so much for the wisdom and sharing your experience. I want to remind everyone, we have a sweepstakes going on for Wildlife Week, and we are now officially halfway through our Wildlife Week programming. And I want to remind everyone what's happening tomorrow and then again on Thursday. So tomorrow, 1 o'clock, we start again. And we're going to have Richard Burnaby. He's going to talk about bears in Alaska. So this is perfect for all you that are here right now. Come hear more about shooting bears. And then right after at 2 o'clock is Christy Odom. She's going to be talking about having fun with fungi and flowers. So that's going to be fun too. And I'm sure wildlife comes into play with all the insects and all those fun little scenes that you can create. So that's tomorrow. And then Thursday, again at 1 o'clock Eastern, we have Ralph Lee Hopkins, who's talking about whale tails, following humpback whale migration. That sounds super interesting. I can't wait to hear it. And then after him, to close things off at 2 o'clock on Thursday, Zach Noyle, a conversation on water photography. So all that water, wildlife, we will round things off. So thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you everybody for joining. It's been such a fun day. Wildlife Week Day 2 is over. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you.